So I want to start with a story that if you've been here following and listening for 10 years, you might have heard once before. It's a story about a man who gets a promotion and does what any normal American would do when they get a promotion, and that is he goes out shopping for a new television. So he lives in San Francisco. He goes out and goes to the store where they sell these televisions, and he finds the one he wants. It's a very large, beautiful screen. I mean, he can see, the eyes of the quarterback when the 49ers throw that winning pass. So he buys the television. He's thrilled, but when he gets it out to his car, it doesn't fit in the car. So they get 3 or 4 people to help him hoist it on top of the car, and they strap it down with as much rope as they can, and they send him off, and he drives home happily. And anyone ever lived in San Francisco knows that you can't park in front of your house in San Francisco. So he drives up, and he has to go another 2 blocks with his new television to park. He has to hire a couple kids, and they help him carry this thing down, and then they charge him a little extra to go up the 2 flights to his apartment. He gets in there and he sets it up, and this television is large. In fact, it's a little too large for the couch that is sitting next to it. And he realizes it makes the couch look very small, so what does he do? He has to go out and buy a new couch. He goes through the same iteration. He finally gets everything set up, and he sits down, and he sits back, and he looks at his room, and he realizes all this stuff is too big for this room. So he leaves the apartment, and he goes and buys a new house, a bigger one. Now, this story could be about me. I have been in many situations just like that, but it's not. I think, if anything, it's a metaphor for American society, a society in the pursuit of more and more. It could be about human society. I have a theory that once we left the trees and went out into the savannah, our ancient ancestors had this natural desire for more and more as a survival tool. But once they settled down and started cultivating things and creating communities, the larger those communities came, the less they actually needed to follow that urge. But we Americans are the gold medal Olympians in the more and more category, and we live in this situation. Now, I haven't realized this recently, but it's come back to me a little more seriously, especially because I just bought a car and I followed that trail right down the rabbit hole. But it made me start to wonder, what on earth are we doing? Why are we living in this way? The more I asked these questions, the more I had questions about my own life. And then I found myself standing in the Apple store. Now, what do you see when you stand in the Apple store? That's not a rhetorical question. That's an actual question. What do you see? iPads, iPods, people, lots of people. You see also a lot of advertising. You see happy people putting earphones in their ears, cutting themselves off from everyone else around them. You see pictures of happy families staring into computer screens as if that will solve all the problems. Now, don't get me wrong, I am a big fan of Apple. 3 of the 4 people in my house have iPhones. 4 out of the 4 people in my house have Apple computers. But when you look past the veneer at the Apple store, the clean lines and the happy pictures, what do you see? You do see successful business, thousands of designers and engineers and smart people creating a technology that came out of the human brain. But this week I was driving to Houston on the way to the area ministers retreat, and I was listening to a radio podcast about the factories where our iPhones and iPads are made, and I started to see past the glossy simplicity of that store. I started seeing the thousands of people working 12 to 16-hour shifts in factories in China until their hands don't work anymore when they are 26 years old. I started to see the incredible tiers of money siphoned off of these gadgets that make their way through transport routes all the way to our pockets. The New York Times just this morning, as I glanced at this article on the way to church, reported Apple has a $400,000 profit per employee per year. I start to see the factory the NPR storyteller went to in Shenzhen, China, where his iPhone and iPad was made, where he talked to workers who started there at age 13. How some of them had shifts where they stood for long, long hours. How the company started putting up nets around the buildings, not to catch birds, but to catch people. This storyteller talked to an old man who was working on the line for the iPad, whose hand was crushed in a metal press, and the company didn't offer him medical care, so his hand healed in a claw-like way, and when he was too slow on the line, they fired him. The man had never seen an iPad completed. And so the storyteller pulled his iPad out and handed it to this man who, with his broken hand, made the icons go back and forth. And the old man said, "This is like magic." And the storyteller said when his hundreds of interviews were done, he asked his interpreter how she thought about the whole thing, and she asked him, "Are these people making these stories up? Are they insane?" He asked her, "What do you think?" He said she suddenly looked very tired and said, "No. It's just that you hear these stories, but you think, this is too much. This is just too much." So I ask you what you see at the Apple Store, or any other store for that matter. If we are honest, we look at everything and we see the legacy of domestication and desire. Our desire. Almost nothing we touch today will be handmade or found naturally in the world. Almost everything will have been touched by this long line of human gain and loss. Almost everything we touch today will touch the line that differentiates the haves and the have-nots. And we are part of those lines. And frankly, that can be rather overwhelming. Now, I'm not condemning the market. I'm not condemning Apple or anyone else. I am not preaching socialism, as I might be accused of if I were a candidate for presidency. But I am questioning really what our spiritual response might be to living in the world we live in with regards to these complicated, market-driven issues. Over the last 30 years, the world in many places has grown the gap between those who have and those who struggle to have, and no more than in the U.S. Think about this. In 1968, I did a little research. The CEO of General Motors made 66 times the average worker at GM. That sounds like a lot. Today, the CEO of Walmart earns 900 times the wages of an average Walmart worker. And the Walmart founding family, the Waltons, this year are worth about $90 billion. That is equivalent to over 120 million Americans in the bottom 40% of the U.S. population. One family, 40% of the U.S. population. Now, I am not condemning the Waltons for their good business sense, but when I researched that, I hope for their sake that they gave some of that away, and in fact, they do. Last year, they gave $25 million to the Knowledge is Power program, the KIPP charter schools. In 2009, they gave $378 million to education and to fresh water and marine conservation. All of that, great efforts. But a short calculation on my iPhone showed me that that was giving away 0.42%. I challenged the Walton family to come join this church, to learn about our half tithe we talk about. But isn't it incredible, some of these disparities? You've heard them in the Occupy movement, but what is our spiritual response? With these economic disparities, we see the breakdown of intergenerational mobility. My generation and those born below me will not, generally speaking, rise above the expectations that our parents had economically. And how economic disadvantage translates in the United States into ill health and missed educational opportunities and familial issues like alcoholism and obesity and criminality. This is a reality in our country. Studies show that inequality plays a role in shaping lives. So, to measure your chances of living a long and healthy life, all you have to do is track your income. Wealth means health, and poverty means illness and short lives. The issue here is inequality. Because it's not just unattractive, it is a pathological social ill. Now, this is not an Occupy meeting. This is a faith meeting. So I want to remind you that this is not new, that religions speak of things like this. 1 out of every 6 things that Jesus said in the Bible related to the danger of our souls in the pursuit of money and possessions. 1 out of every 3 parables does the same thing, challenges you to consider these issues. And if you're reading the Bible and you see something else, I think you're missing something. Do you remember the parable that says it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven? So the story about this is that there was a gate in Jerusalem, and when the camels came loaded with their goods, they had to take the goods off in order to pass through the gate. The evangelicals will say the camel even had to get on their knees, reminding you that prayer was a good thing. But what is that camel doing? This is not a condemnation of the rich man himself or of monetary wealth. It is asking what the burdens come with wealth do to your soul. And are you able or willing to shed those fears that come with protecting the money you make, with holding tightly on to those things? Can you enter heaven, in other words, they said, if you are carrying all those burdens that each of us carry around when we consider our own financial lives? So what is our spiritual responsibility to all this? Sally McFaig, in her essay, A Manifesto to North American Middle-Class Christians, which I love that title, says there are new house rules. She says our planet is asking us to respond. The basic rules for each of us to live on this planet, which she calls the house, are very simple. You learn them from your mother or your father or wherever you grew up. Take only your share. Clean up after yourself. and keep the house in good repair for future occupants. So this means we must find ways to think beyond our own personal needs every day. We must consider that if everyone is to have a place at the table in our house, we must agree to some limits of planetary energy. We must support limits. We must see that abundant life does not mean abundant life just for us and our children, but for all people. The person who got me thinking about this more seriously and most recently is Greer Raggio, a member of our church and a leader in our community. Greer ran for Congress in the last election, and he started a website called We Consume Too Much. He said to me, "Daniel, I know that title sounds a little negative, but it gets to the point, you know?" And on that that blog, he says we must support a carbon tax, taxes on fossil fuels as they enter and leave the country. We must think about agreeing to pay a tax every time we fill our cars so that we can drive around to offset the damage it does to the environment. His good work is our work, spiritual work of waking up, of renewal for the vows we human beings have taken to care for each other. I said to Greer, I thought the carbon tax was a good start, but how about asking the people to buy more local goods, to support companies that think about their employees and about the planet, and to consider each and every day, each act we do as a sacred one, sacred and meaningful. That we consume too much, that we consider that is a complicated and multi-layered statement. But for me, it is a spiritual charge. Can we free ourselves from the pain of our own need for more and more? The mantra I am asking myself over and over these days is this something I need or is this something I want? I am asking myself, how much can I give away to help those who have less? And I'm not just asking those questions in prayer in church, but every day and every interaction. And I realize that one of the solutions to this addiction is the latter. When I became a tither, that means I give away 10% of everything I make, 5% to this church and 5% to other organizations. That as much stress as that puts on me and my family and my checking account, I feel freed by the checks I write, the ones I write to the organizations I believe in. Those checks get my soul's attention. And they say to my soul, your security is not tied to your bank account. Give because you need to give. Your soul needs it. Those checks say that to pursue more and more, like any addiction, is insatiable. Because the more it gets, the more it wants. So I started asking myself if I'm ready for the More Things Anonymous meeting, where I would say, my name is Daniel. I am addicted to more. Help me live with enough, a day at a time. Sally McFaig writes, we North American privileged people who are consuming many times our share at the table must find ways to restructure our lives, our society, our nation, and our world toward greater equitability. This is not only good work, this is holy work. And work that starts with our faith. Faith in ourselves and faith in each other and faith in our communities. We as spiritual people can and must start asking ourselves these questions. What do we need? How much can I give? And is there a heaven for me in shedding my fear and pain or desire? This is the spiritual and ecological reformation at hand. It means we must ask again and again and mean it one time when we say it. Are we our brothers and sisters keepers? Are we willing to see the abundance of life, God's holy work, as our precious gift to care for? And in this way, will we move toward a more truly fulfilling life that cuts below the gadgets that we keep in our pockets to a house of hope and love, to lives that see the wisdom of the ages, calling us to close those things and see each other and move through the world for each other. I wouldn't preach this message if I didn't think you could do it. We can do this. And we must do this. And it begins with each of us here today. I give you that. Amen.